Over land and sea and air, G.I. Joe is there. Here's a look at the brand new Super 7 G.I. Joe Ultimate Duke First Sergeant. G.I. Joe's field commander, Sergeant Conrad S. Hauser, better known as Duke, knows multiple languages, but the one he may be most fluent in is the language of kicking Cobra's tail. This 7-inch scale fully articulated G.I. Joe Ultimates figure of Duke comes with interchangeable heads and hands, and a variety of accessories allowing you to create the many of your favorite cartoon and vintage toy looks. A leader among leaders, Duke's Ultimate figure is a great way to start building your G.I. Joe team. Soon we're going to learn a lot more about Duke, and as we all know, learning is half the battle. But though before we do that, let's grab the tape measure just to see how tall the brand new G.I. Joe Ultimates Duke stands. With the tape measure right to the very top of the head, I can clearly see that the figure is 6 3/4 of an inch tall, or the figure's 17 centimeters in height. And for your comparisons, seeing as we are talking about Super 7 and all, I wanted to bring in some other Super 7 Ultimate figures. So here's what Duke looks like with the Lord of the Thundercats Lino. In this case, obviously you're not going to have the two displayed on your shelf, or maybe you will. Maybe you want to have yourself a big 80s setup display. In this case, though, Duke is not only leaner, but a lot taller than Lino. And while I don't have Quicksilver, because obviously Quicksilver is part of Wave 1, we only have Wave 2 right now. Here's what he also looks like with Silverhawks member Steel Will. What's rather interesting, I didn't mention this in Steel Will's review. I did want to actually make this correction here in this review. Steel Will, while I did like the color of the blue, doesn't really quite match the colors that he has in the cartoon. All of the Silverhawks really have a very distinct color. Bluegrass did have blue, but Steel Will was more kind of a lighter gray, Steel Heart was a darker gray, and then Quicksilver was more of a silver. So they all sort of had their own color scheme. In this case, Steel Will, that we looked at earlier, has more just the blue to match the group Bluegrass, which isn't really 100% correct. What Super 7, though, did do correctly, at least with Duke, was to package the figure not only with cartoon-specific accessories, but also ones that came included with the 80s toy of Duke, which I still wish I had. A lot of my older G.I. Joes, I would have gotten rid of them a long time ago, so I don't have one, actually, an original Duke to bring out for comparisons. I think that would have been fun. But what I can do, at least, is talk about the accessories here to the left. I don't know if you can actually see all of them, so we're going to bring them out here. First of all, the figure comes included with the binoculars that the original G.I. Joe Duke and many of the other 80s G.I. Joes would have all had. These never really sit properly on the figure's body, and like the original 80s toys, when you even put it around Duke's head, it deliberately, I mean, it's not soft enough plastic, so it sort of just hangs out his neck, but that's exactly the way that the original ones were, too. I had a lot of the original 80s toys, like I said, for the G.I. Joes, and I think a lot of times with these binoculars, I usually just warped them. I'm not going to do it, obviously, with these ones here, but I usually would just warp them a little bit so that the string in bunny ears would have actually hung a little bit better around the character's neck. I like the way that they've recreated this. I mean, it looks very much like the original 80s accessory. You can see it's all molded here in just solely a black plastic. I'm not going to be displaying this, though, with the figure, but we're going to put that to the side. The figure also comes included with his gun, and I believe this is an M16, though colored here in green. It has the stock on the back, as you can see. It's all exactly the way that the original toy would have had it, and this does fit into his hands, though not really with the closed fist that he has right now. He does have at least some other hands. I'm going to put that into his hands in a second. The figure also comes included with a helmet, and instead of actually giving you an alternate head sculpt that would have already had the helmet in place, this helmet is not the softest of plastic, but you can fit it over top of at least this existing head. The thing that has me the most worried, though, is the way they probably have painted the head sculpt. I would worry that frequent use of adding on the helmet like this would chip away the plastic paint. You can see it does look good on Duke. Not only would he have had this in the cartoon, but again, like the original 80s toy would have had this as well, although Duke's hair back then would have had it more slicked back. But again, I don't know how I feel about the idea. First of all, his head falls off quite frequently from the ball peg. But to do this frequently, though, on the figure's head, I feel like it's going to start to flake the paint, especially on the hair and the sides of the ears. For me, at least, I would much rather have Duke without the helmet myself. And I think really in a case like this, they should have either made the helmet bigger. Obviously, it would have looked a little too out of place to have it too big. Or I probably would have just given us a head sculpt that already had the helmet attached to it. Because again, like putting this on, taking it off, well, again, you know what I'm talking about. The figure also comes included with a backpack. And I believe the original backpack was actually more colored to his gun and not like this. So not only does this look like the original backpack that he would have had, but it now has straps on the back. It's a little bit more colored appropriately, I feel, to the cartoon and what real world colors would look like on a toy, or at least on a character. We can bring those arms back. I noticed with the arms, the shoulders themselves are a little on the more tighter side. And we just take Duke's arms. It's like dressing a tiny little toddler. I dressed my daughter to school, but she's not the size of Duke. She's a little bit taller than Duke. And we just fit that around his arms like that. Make sure, of course, the straps are, there we go. And that just plugs on the back of his body. They've done away with really the idea of using a peg system. Obviously, you would see a big hole on the back of poor Duke's torso. If Duke was going to have a hole anywhere in his body, it would be like right here in the front, where the snake of Serpentor plunged its way in. Don't worry, Duke's out of a coma. Yeah, Duke was never supposed to be in a coma. So I do like the idea that they gave us at least a real practical knapsack backpack. I know here in Canada we call them knapsacks, but backpacks. We're going to just drape that off his shoulders. One thing I certainly would like to see, mentioned already, the serpent snake, but also I would have liked to have seen a jetpack, similar to what Duke would have had in the opener of G.I. Joe movie. One of my favorite openers of a cartoon series or a movie, the opener of G.I. Joe. But he would have also had a backpack or a jetpack that again would have gone on the back of the figure's body. I'm sure we could get ourselves a second version of Duke at some point down the road. That may even be a movie tie-in. Duke could give himself the jetpack. Super 7 could give him a jetpack, and maybe again a section where Serpentor's snake could be stuck in the front of his body. Don't worry, he's out of a coma now. How is he even in a coma? Duke should have been dead. Anyways, though, the figure also then comes included with a walkie-talkie. The walkie-talkie from here looks like it's got 802 here on the front, and it also has a dial down below here. I'm sure this is a reference to the cartoon, although unfortunately I'm drawing a bit of a blank, trying to remember what this would have been. There must be a reasoning why they did put the 802 there on the front. If anybody happens to know, feel free to let me know down below in the comment section. And this again can't fit in his hands. Something a little bit more accurate to the cartoon, unlike the gun we already had a look at. He does come with his laser cannon or laser pistol. The pistol, or I should say in this case a laser rifle, is one that all the G.I. Joes would have had. This is basically a required gun that all the G.I. Joes would be using to battle Cobra. They would be fighting, I think they'd be lasering red lasers, and Cobra would have been blue lasers. Nobody ever got really hurt in the G.I. Joe cartoon, but I love the idea that they would have included this. I don't think in the cartoon it's lighter than this. It's not as much of a brown, but it's kind of more of a closer tan color in the classic cartoon. But the idea that they would have actually included this as a nice touch. Snake Eyes, that we will be looking at in an upcoming review as well, also comes included with this gun as well. Stay tuned for that. Of course, all the talk I've been doing this whole time about the figure being able to carry anything isn't going to be good at much of any helpful use, unless I actually showed you guys the hands the figure comes included with as well. So he has the moving forward, pointing directional hand, or just a flat karate chopping hand. Figure comes included with that. The figure comes included, of course, if he's going to be leading the G.I. Joe team. He does have a pointing hand. That's always good as well. The figure also comes included with a pair, and I say a pair of gripping hands, specifically designed for holding not only the classic gun, which we can get into his hands. The plastic, by the way, as well for the hands is pretty soft, so it's pretty easy to hold. Not only the M16, but also the more cartoon cannon, not quite cannon, but rifle, that also does fit in his hand as well. To change out the hands, by the way, fairly easy, although the first time I did this, I noticed that this hand was really hard to remove. Finally doing this a couple of times, it's a lot easier to unpeg, and we can also do the exact same thing on this side as well. There we go. And let's go ahead and take ourselves a hand, not that it really matters which side it's going to be on, plug in the hand that holds the trigger, and then on this side, actually what we can do too, is the other included hands the figure has, is to hold the understock of the gun. Again, you can have it on this side, or you can have it on this side. Obviously, stick with the opposite hand then. We're going to plug this back into place. There we go. And then from there, you can take yourself the rifle, slot it in the one side that has the dedicated trigger firing finger. And then on this side, you can bring the hand around and hold it to the undercarriage of the gun. That looks really cool. I'm going to probably have it like this, or what I might also end up doing too is swap one of the hands out and have the arm up like this, Duke turning his head and then maybe just pointing the Joe team towards Cobra bases. It's always going to be a Cobra base somewhere in a G.I. Joe episode. I like that. I really like that a lot. The figure, lastly, comes included with a series of interchangeable heads. The one that we are looking at right now, sort of a stock head sculpt. One thing I did also want to mention, too, is with this particular head, I don't know about everybody else's. I can't speak for everybody else's, but I only can really speak to the one I have in front of me. The head seems to come off quite easily on the ball peg post. Try saying that 5 times fast. It does fit on there, but I don't feel like it stays on as well as it should. I guess it does make things a little bit then easier to be able to remove the head. And while we're still on the topic of heads, what a good head sculpt that is, looking very much like Duke does from the original cartoon. This one also, I think it was voiced by the same guy that also did a whole bunch of Transformer cartoons. He was sort of the go-to guy back in the 80s. But he was also, I believe, a health guru in an episode of Three's Company that was trying to smuggle money. I think from Chrissy Snow. Was he? I think he was like a yoga instructor or a cult leader, something along those lines. Maybe it was even Janet too. Yeah, I think it was Janet. That's right. Janet wanted to get into dance. Anyways, I'm getting off on a side tangent. The figure comes also included with this head sculpt here too. Now, honestly, I kind of like this one just a little bit more because it does have, you can see there's more visible teeth. He does have his mouth open. Granted, he does have his communicator headset on there. He probably would be flying around in a Skyhawk. Now, this just easily unplugs because we already know by the fact that this does remove quite easily. You just plug this new one in place. And this one, you actually have to work a little harder to get it onto the post. Plug it in place. I don't think I've got it all the way down there. Let's just push it down a little bit harder. There we go. And that's what Duke looks like then with the communicator headset. Again, I wish there was a way to actually remove the headset so I would be able to have this head sculpt instead. I mean, it's not that much different really than this one, other than it's just got the open mouth. Wish this almost would have been a separate piece that they could have just had that you could attach over top of the head. Hey now. Speaking of extra things I would have liked to see this figure come included with, while we're on the topic of actually a headset, I really wish that they could have included the restraining band that he would have had in the Mass Device episode, where he fights that giant guy in the arena of sports. I wish they could have included that as well. Even if it was just a ring of plastic that could have fit around Duke's head, I think that would have been an awesome reference to a cartoon episode and something I would have loved to see included. Anyways, there's this head sculpt, and then there's also this one here as well. We're going to just, actually, you know what, just before we pop this off, there's also the Yo Joe Duke head sculpt, which actually looks less like he's saying Yo Joe, and it actually looks more like he's noticed a foul stench. I don't know, maybe, I don't know, Snake Eyes' Timberwolf has left the stench, left a pile of something in G.I. Joe headquarters. And he's like, Snake Eyes. It's not really what Duke sounds like. Anyways, we're going to unplug that. And then we're going to plug in this head sculpt. And again, with those heads, you can still use the helmet. Although, again, I don't like the idea of really putting the helmet over top of his head. Because, again, I think it's going to be flaking the plastic off, the plastic paint off. But that's what it looks like with the helmet in place. Let's revert this guy back to his original defaulted self. And then looking at the rest of Duke's body, again, he has more of that mustard yellow shirt that he has in the cartoon. It does look pretty good and translates well to a very articulated figure. Although right here, it sinks in an awkward way that it looks like he's sucking in his guts. Now, obviously, the only way then to accommodate an ab crunch, which this figure does possess, is by being able to put in a more sunken-in section right here. But it does look a little weird and out of place when you see it from the side. The arms, in this case, he does have the sleeves rolled up, so you have a little bit of his exposed arm down below here. He does have a watch, which I was worried that was going to lose. I was going to lose if I was going to remove the hands. But it even seems like when I'm removing the hands, just to do this right now for a second, it seems like the watch stays pretty good in place. They probably have glued it, so I don't think that's going to be a case where you're going to be losing the watch. Plug that back in. He does have the little marker there on the top there, his wings there up at the top, and he has some additional yellow, a little additional orange, I should say, there on his shoulders as well. Like in the cartoon, he also does have a bandolier. Now, in this case, it's made of a more softer brown plastic. It doesn't serve any real purpose. There's no place that you can attach additional guns or anything along those lines. I did notice, though, there's a little lip of plastic here that sort of sticks up on the back of the bandolier, on my figure at least. And one thing I did want to mention here, at least on Duke, is while the paint's been really good and clean on this guy, there are a few little places that I've noticed, like, for example, on his leg. I've noticed, and checking out other reviews of these G.I. Joe Ultimate figures, that this seems to be a common thing. It's a little bit of glue, and it's just in these random places. He has it right here on his leg. I don't think he has it as much in his arms or in his body, but it seems like more his leg than anything else. I'm trying to see if there's any other spot. I don't see any other spot. I think the Snake Eyes was the worst culprit for having these extra little bits of glue. I've heard some people could actually take themselves like a magic eraser and very carefully wipe that off. There's not enough of it, at least, that bothers me, but I did notice that there was one right there on my Duke. And again, you could probably see it as I tilt it towards the camera. One other thing I wanted to also mention with Duke here, on mine at least, is while this leg sits pretty close to the lower part of his torso, this leg strangely has a big gap on it, and I don't know the reasoning why. I want to bring the leg in as best I can. It kind of also reminds me of the toy version of Lion-O that we looked at not too long ago as well, where Lion-O's leg didn't seem like it almost was fully attached to the peg, and I feel like that's almost the same case here with Duke. I mean, it's not to the point where I can see the joint, but I can definitely notice there's a lot more of a gap on this side than there's this side here. As for the rest of the figure, he does have, like, again, those weird-looking boots that he has in the cartoon. But, you know, again, as a whole, like, the figure does look really good. I feel like I've also studied these reviews well by doing not only the leader of the G.I. Joe team, but also, I think, looking at one of the better figures of the 4 figures. I think all of them have actually been really good. The only one I really have kind of a little more iffiness about is Cobra Commander, that we will be looking at in an upcoming video. For the articulation, though, for Duke, his head is on a ball joint, so we can rotate that head all the way around. Yeah, and occasionally, as you're rotating the head's going to pop off the post. Just pop that back into place. Now, the head is going to be very limited when it comes to looking down. I mean, if you look at that as being kind of the defaulted pose, having the head down, that's as far as it really does go. Not very much at all. Head does look up, but that's as far up as it's going to go as well. Head does also rock back and forth as well. The arms come out. Now, I've noticed with my arms at least, not my arms, Duke's arms, that his arms don't come out completely at 90 degrees. There seems to be resistance a lot when it comes to bringing those arms out. And if anything, I would say and settle at probably 45 as opposed to 90. You can take those arms, you can rotate them all the way around. The figure does have a bicep swivel. The figure only possesses a single hinge on the elbow, which I know may disappoint some by the fact that you can't really get as much articulation with these elbows. But I mean, again, when it comes to the articulation, these figures, how drastic, how extreme am I really going to want to get with Duke's shoulders or elbows anyways? Forearms do rotate back and forth. I did notice this forearm's a little on the looser side. This one's not so bad. It's starting to get loose, though. And the hands, again, rotate all the way around. We already talked about the fact that the figure has a front torso crunch. You can rotate it back and forth at the waist. Legs do split out, once again, relying on looks like a pin and socket joint on the inside of the legs. Legs go forward, and the legs go back. But back, that's as far back as they're really going to be able to go. There's also a swivel at the top of the thigh, only possessing a single hinge on the knee. The boots rotate back and forth, and strangely, the way they've attached it, it almost has a way that you'd be able to mix and match the feet. And I only say that because we always look at the Master Universe figures here on this channel. It kind of looks like the same similar system. It looks like it's just literally plugged onto a post. Because of that, it does give you at least the posability in the leg, but unfortunately because of that as well, it feels like the leg, or at least the boot, always wants to be coming off. The feet also hinge up and down this way. You can also ankle rock them. And just in case you are curious, the leader of G.I. Joe does have pegals on the undersides of his feet as well. All in all, a great looking figure. With all the Ultimates we've been looking at here lately here on this channel from the folks over at Super7, I mean, let's run through them. We've looked at the Ren and Stimpy figures. We've looked at Thundercats, of course. We've now recently started to look at Silverhawks and now G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe was the one that was I was the most interested, most excited, not only to review, but also to collect in my collection space. I grew up with G.I. Joe. As much as I love things like Visionaries and Humanoids, Transformers, you name all the cool 80s stuff that was around back in the day, G.I. Joe sat the highest on my list of my favorite go-to cartoons. So finally getting ourselves true cartoon recreations of the way those characters look in the cartoon. Like this looks like Duke from the cartoon. I was always personally more of a Flint fan myself, which we are getting a Flint in a future wave, but I can't be happier with how Duke turned out. Duke does have a few little quips to him, a few little things that aren't necessarily deal breakers, but all in all, I think I'm really happy with not only looking at Duke here, but I'm really excited to have a look at the rest of the 3 figures that make up this wave as well. Wrapping up things now here in final looks. There are a few corrections I did want to make, as earlier mentioned in the review. I did talk about his backpack being the same green color as his submachine gun, and that wasn't actually the case. The backpack in the original 80s version of Duke was actually a tan color, so it's pretty close to the color that we get for the backpack that comes included with the figure now. Granted, the backpack that comes included with the figure now does have at least functioning straps instead of a peg that goes on a very obvious hole that would have been on the back of the figure's body. The other thing I did also want to mention too is I may have called it an M16. I believe it's an M32 submachine gun that came with the original 80s Duke toy. It doesn't really matter anyways. I'm not going to be displaying, I think, the figure with any of the accessories referencing more to the 80s toy. I think I'm rather instead going to be displaying this guy looking like he was pulled from the cartoon, which really does look like he was pulled from the original Sunbow cartoon back in the day. Good selection also I wanted to mention already is good good selection of figures that they did choose for the Wave 1 lineup. We do get ourselves all 80 reference characters, like the original series run of G.I. Joe, even like the original Mass Device Snake Eyes as part of this first wave. They do throw in a Cobra Bat, which normally I would have said I think they would have waited a Cobra Bat for a later wave. But to be all honest, the Cobra Bat looks awesome, and I'm looking forward to having a look at that one as well. All in all, really good start for the G.I. Joe Ultimates figure wave. Let me know if in the comment section down below if you guys have been collecting any of the brand new Super 7 G.I. Joe Ultimates, or if you have been collecting any Ultimates in general. It could be Silverhawks, it could be like Thundercats. What have you guys been collecting when it comes to Super 7 Ultimates? Let me know down below in the comments section. Also as well, if you guys are interested to pick this one up for yourself, Duke, as well as all of Wave 1 of the G.I. Joe Ultimates, is available right now over on Entertainment Earth. That's where this guy actually ended up picking up the entire wave. I ordered it, I think, on the Monday, and the delivery showed, I think showed up either, I think, the Monday or the Tuesday of the following week. So they shipped these guys really fast. But again, if you guys are interested, you can certainly click the link down below in the video description. And also, maybe as a throw-out video question for you guys, the viewing audience, let me know who you preferred more as the leader of the Joes. Now, I would not say Flint was the leader of the Joes, but he was always one that led the charge. I was always a bigger Flint fan myself. The original 80s Flint was my favorite beloved toy of the entire G.I. Joe line. So you already know where my bias is going to be sitting. But who was your favorite leader of the Joes? Was it Duke? Was it Flint? I might even just throw Hawk in there as well. Who's your favorite leader of the Joes? Let me know down below in the comments section. Certainly as well, if you enjoyed this video, I want to hit it with a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing and certainly are on board to see the rest of the G.I. Joe Ultimates, then make sure if you haven't already done so that you hit the subscribe button down below and that you're also moving on over to the bell notification. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.